Our next speaker is well known to us, and I suppose as chairman, and I hate doing this, but I put the challenge to a politician that, David, if you could just keep it reasonably short, and I know you're very capable of doing that, but we do welcome you here today. You've been around a long time, you're a very big supporter of rural councils, and we welcome you here today.
So what I'll do first is get my phone out and start the clock, so I've got some idea how long I've been talking for. Rob, thanks for the invitation to come and have a chat again this afternoon. I do appreciate the opportunity. Can I acknowledge, obviously, Mary Lalios from the MAV. I saw John Watson sneaking past before from the Grants Commission. I think behind that microphone is Colin Morrison from LGV. Councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Just quickly, very quickly, by way of background, because I've been asked to talk a little bit about, not so much the broader picture, because you've heard at length from Matthew a bit earlier, but just to talk a little bit about what the relationship between a potential Liberal National Coalition government and the local government sector might be. But just by way of background, I've been in Parliament for coming up 12 years. For 7 of those 12 years, I was either Parliamentary Secretary or Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for local government. That finished at the end of 2014, and then September, I think it was last year, Matthew asked me to come back and pick up the local government portfolio in addition to the finance responsibilities that I'd carried for the previous 3 years. So I have a fairly strong background in terms of state government, local government, but of course I was also for 7.5 years a councillor at the old Shire of Mornington back in the dark ages, pre-amalgamation. Shire President. The only reason I mention that is because I've been in the trenches, I know what it's like, and while local government certainly is a very different creature to the old 210 councils, it's still, the basics are still there. The basics are still there. It's about, as it is for state parliamentarians, it's about serving our communities. And that is the central part of local government. The other thing I should say is that probably the only reason I'm standing here talking to you today as a Member of Parliament is because back in 1986, and some of you heard me say this before, but back in 1986, John Cain decided he was going to turn 210 councils into 78 or 60 or 50 or whatever the figure was under Stuart Morris. I didn't like that idea, my community didn't like that idea. I really didn't know why I didn't like it. I only had a passing engagement with my local council, but I didn't like it. I got involved, and of course, ultimately that particular push was stopped, only to be reignited under the Kennett government a few years later. But the outcome of that experience for me was I got to know a whole lot more about what local government did, particularly my own council, and I thought, you know, I was running a small business, I thought I really wouldn't mind getting involved, and you know, I was pretty well connected to the community, but getting a lot more connected to the community. And I managed to succeed in doing that the following year. So I never had any ambition to go into politics in any way at all. But local government was, I guess, my first love in that respect. And I think it's been this way since the 1870s. Our local councils are absolutely critical parts of our local communities. Now, obviously, councils are now a lot bigger, but I don't think that's changed the relationship with the community. So, to talk about what the relationship with a coalition government might be with local government. First thing, and again, some of you have heard me say this before, some of my colleagues just can't help themselves. They start saying, well, you know, we've got a couple of councils that are either having financial difficulties or they're not providing services. So how about we'll amalgamate them and cut costs and that'll solve the problem. My view is if you put 2 or 3 or 4 councils together that are having difficulties, I won't say struggling because I don't think there's a council in the state that struggles, but where there are challenges, you just finish up with one big council with equal challenges. So, as far as I'm concerned, if a local community wants an amalgamation, if the local council wants an amalgamation, happy to look at it. But unless someone comes to me and says, we reckon this is the way to go, that's not an agenda we'll be running. The second, and I think far more important point about what our relationship might be, is I look back to my time, and as I say, it was the Dark Ages, but there was a much greater degree of mutual respect between local government and state government. And yes, because many of the councils were a lot smaller, there was a far greater distance. There weren't the ties between council officers and state government public servants that exist in many cases today. And I'm sure the CEOs in the room won't agree with me, but I'm sure as far as council is concerned, sometimes those ties can be very frustrating because the council bureaucracy and the state bureaucracy can run on their own agenda and leave those sitting around the council table behind. But that's not the key point. I think the key point is there's unfortunately, in terms of the broader picture, there is a lack of respect on both sides, and I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a healthy thing. Not saying, the state government should be saying whatever you 79 councils want, we'll just tell us and we'll deliver it. Nor am I saying you, as leaders in your own communities, should say, oh, well, we'll gloss over our priorities because this is state policy, this is what the state government wants. It's about contesting that space. I mean, every ward councillor has to look after their ward, but they need to look at the effect of the broader community in their municipal district. It's the same for us. I've got to worry about what happens in the seat of Mornington. To a broader extent, I've got to worry about what happens in the Mornington Peninsula. But I can't do that without thinking about the impact on the whole state and whether what's good for me is going to be appropriate for the state of Victoria as well. So I think we've got to work harder at improving the relationship between local government and state government. And I don't mean by new structures, new agreements, new reams of paper or memorandums of understanding. I think we've just got to work a little bit better at getting the priorities of the state and the priorities of local government more attuned. I mean, after all, we're all about, every councillor in the room, all of my colleagues are about serving our community, about doing the best possible thing for our community, and we should be able to work together to do that. Now, there are a lot of blurred lines, and in my experience, where you have blurred lines, you have friction. Whether creating greater clarity with those blurred lines is the way to go, which would obviously clip council's wings, I don't think so. But I think we need to have a conversation and we need to have a much better understanding of the expectations of the Parliament and the expectations of the state government of local government, and from a local government perspective, the expectations of each local council as well as the industry about their expectations of the state. And you need to have that conversation and basically agree whether those expectations are justified, whether those expectations will be delivered. I just want to finish off on one point that I said before about the expectations of the state of local government. And many councillors have said to me over a long journey, well, we're an independent sphere of government, just get out of our way and let us get on with our job. And I have a lot of sympathy for that perspective. The practical difficulty with that, though, is that the considerable authority that councils get to exert in their local communities is actually authority delegated by the State Parliament under the Local Government Act or under the Planning and Environment Act or whatever it is. And because it is a delegated authority, the Parliament collectively has a very strong interest in how that authority is exercised. Doesn't mean we're saying, all right, local government is the child of state government, therefore we will keep you in after school if you misbehave. It means that local government, in my view, is a grown adult and more than able to exercise that authority in an appropriate way with the appropriate discretions. But we need to have that adult relationship between the two spheres. And if I do get the opportunity to become the Minister after the November, that's certainly one aspect of the relationship that I would be very, very keen to work on and very, very keen to improve over 4 years. Thanks for asking me to come and have a chat.